Welcome to Tarunayas. Today we will be discussing editorials from The Hindu of 28th of October 2022. So let's start. I have taken this editorial from The Hindu, but basically this is from the opinion section, and this was in interview form, and the title is Should Governments Sell Liquor and Run Lotteries? The topic is basically the role of the government. You can relate it with your general studies paper 2, government policies, intervention for development in various sectors, and issues arising out of their design and implementation. So let's see what the government, what the writer has to say with respect to the role of the government in selling liquor and lotteries, and specifically when it comes to the role of the government in business. All right. Now there have always been a debate with respect to whether the government should be in a business, or there should be no intervention by the government, by the state, in the business. India, since independence, and at the time of the independence, we adopted mixed model of economy. And if we trace the industrial policies of India since the time of its independence, that is when the first industrial policy came in the year 1956, from then onwards, if we trace the industrial policies, then we would see that the role of the government has been shrinking. That means from the mixed model, the government of India slowly post 1980s started to move towards the capitalist model, and the state government, and particularly the government of India during the beginning of the independence had to kind of monopolize certain sectors, and a very less space was given to the private sectors. But with the passage of time, and in fact specifically after 1990s LPG reform, the government of India started to retract from the business. However, still there are certain sectors which are specifically and strictly regulated by the government of India and by other state governments as well. Alcohol and lotteries are those particular sectors which are strictly regulated by the government, and alcohol and lotteries, they fall particularly in the state list. So we know that according to the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution, there are 3 lists. There is union list, and there is state list, and there is concurrent list. Alcohol falls under state list. The manufacturing, sale, purchase, distribution, etc., and regulation of alcohol falls under the prerogative of the state government. The state government has the complete right whether it wants to ban the alcohol, for example in the state of Gujarat and Bihar, or it wants to regulate the alcohol. For example, in certain other states the alcohol is regulated, and in some states the alcohol is freely distributed. Lotteries, however, there are variations observed when it comes to the regulation of the lotteries. There are certain states in which the lotteries are strictly regulated, but there are certain states, for example, Sikkim, Goa, where lotteries and Kerala, where lotteries are the major source of the revenue. There has been a prolonged tussle between the Kerala governor and the Kerala state government. And we know, when it comes to the structure of the governance and the structure of the government in India, we have the head of the state as president and the head of the government as prime minister. The similar model is followed for the state as well. And state are not the arms of the union government, rather they are the autonomous units of the federal structure that India has. Though the term federation or federal is not mentioned in the constitution, the Article 1 defines India as the union of states. However, the model is similar to this model. It is followed in the state. There is a governor who is the head of the state, and there is chief minister who is the head of the government. Now, according to the Article 163 and Article 164 of the state executives, the governor of the state is to function as per the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Chief Minister. Alright, now this arrangement has always come under the contradiction. The opinion of the governor is something else, and the opinion of the Council of Ministers is something else. Therefore, however, according to the Constitution, the governor is bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers. But there is one small caveat here. Let me explain it. Now, 44th Constitution Amendment of 1948 basically made the recommendation of the Council of Ministers binding on the President. However, no such arrangement is present for the Governor. So, Governor and Chief Minister, they're always in this tussle for the governance and to exert their power, their official powers, whether it is Kerala. And Kerala, in fact, in Kerala, it has been a long drawn issue now. There is always a tussle between the state government of West Bengal and the governor of the West Bengal. So this is always been the case, and when it comes to the Indian governing structures. So Kerala governor, the context is that Kerala governor heavily criticized the state government for relying on revenue from the sin good. Now, what are these sin goods? When we talk about the sin goods, the basic definition of the sin good that would follow is that these goods have a negative impact on the society. For example, alcohol and lottery. What negative impact they are going to have? Alcohol leads to bankruptcy. It also leads to the domestic violence. Majority of the alcohol is consumed by the male members of the family, and thus leading to the loss of revenue of the family, loss of income of the family, and wife beating, etc., children beating, basically domestic violence. So that is the reason why the Kerala governor said this. However, in Kerala, lotteries and alcohol, in fact, in many of the states, alcohol are the major source of income, and that is the reason why the alcohols for the toiletries preparation and the excise duty on alcohol is not under the GST. In fact, this alcohol and petrol, diesel, petrol, they were kept out of GST because they form the fiscal space of the state government, barring certain states which have banned alcohol. However, complete banning of alcohol has not resulted into the lower consumption. There is black marketing and smuggling of alcohol from the neighboring state. For example, in the state of Gujarat, there is smuggling of alcohol from the neighboring state of from Maharashtra. In Bihar also, there is black marketing, and so banning is not a solution. According to the writer, we will talk about what the writer has to say. This is in the form of the interview, but we have to discuss certain basic with respect to this. So let's talk about the taxes and the revenue. According to the Article 270, and the GST Council was formed, and there was a constitutional amendment in the constitution. So the fiscal space of the state is very limited. States, they rely heavily on the dispersal from this union government after the recommendation of the Finance Commission. So the Finance Commission would decide the percentage of the revenue that has to be shared with the state government, which is 41% according to the 15th Finance Commission. So this fiscal space of the state government is very limited, and after the GST and after the way the union government has been relying on generating the revenue from cess and surcharges, the fiscal space is shrinking for the state government. The conditional loan disbursement, the conditional grant from the union government. So all in all, so in conclusion, the fiscal space of the government, of the state government, is shrinking, and that is the reason why the state government rely majorly on the indirect source of the income, and the union government major revenue comes from the direct income taxes. So let's talk about what the writer has to say now. So we have discussed that lotteries and alcohol, they are under the state government, and there are certain ways by which the state government generates revenue. For example, alcohol is one. The excise duty is levied on the manufacturing of a certain product. So excise duty on the alcohol is one source of revenue for the state government. Lotteries are also revenue for the state government. However, these two things fall under the sin goods. All right. So the state government sell sin goods? Like this should be sin goods by mistake. So this is sin good, all right. So should government sell sin good? Now let's recount what the Constitution of India has to say in this matter. Article 47. So when we speak of the Article 47 of the Directive Principles of State Policy, which talks about that the state has this responsibility, this moral responsibility to promote the health and to prohibit the consumption of the intoxicants, including alcohol. So when when the DPSP talks about promoting the health of the citizenry and prohibiting the consumption of the intoxicants like alcohol, etc., then why the state government promotes such activities? Why the state government has to rely on alcohol? All right, so the reason we discussed that because of the limited fiscal space that the states are given. States have a very narrow source of revenue. They have a very limited fiscal space to generate revenue, and when it comes to the implementation of the scheme, the centralization of the scheme is also becoming an issue. Freebies are there, the farm loan waiver by many of the state governments, and in order to incentivize the state government, they give certain in order to incentivize the investors and other private developers, the state government has to give incentives therefore the fiscal space, it starts to shrink when it comes to the state government. So therefore state governments, they rely on other sources of the income, alcohol being the major source of income. The writer starts from the argument that the government has no role in business. The government is basically has to govern the country. It has more of a regulatory role. It cannot completely ban anything, for example alcohol, because banning leads to black marketing. However, regulation or better norms of regulation would result into the better governance, but not complete ban, as in case of the Bihar and Gujarat. The writer also points to the fact that the state government to be in the business, that means the writer is talking about monopolizing the business. So it says that it basically contradicts the role of a state to provide the public goods, and sin goods, they have bad impact on the weaker section of the society. Now DPSP also talks about uplifting the weaker section. Like, if in essence if I speak of the article 47 and article 46 and article 48 and article 48A of the DPSPs, then we will understand that why the state government role to be in the business of alcohol production and lotteries contradicts its role as a provider of health, as a provider of public good, and not the sin good. And sin good basically results into it has a very bad social impact, as we discussed. It breaks down the families. All right, it creates nuisance and menace in the society. The Indian state has regulated alcohol sale, consumption, distribution, and manufacturing. This we discussed. Involvement has been. Now, the writer says that why the state governments are involved in this business. The involvement is basically driven by the desire of the state government for revenue. However, the writer also says that it is not desirable to be completely dependent on a single commodity. The other viewpoint says that the writer can basically play a positive role. So writer suggests that the state government can impose heavy taxes. So the writer says that the state government can play a positive role via taxes, and such taxes levied on the sin goods would then be utilized for the development and other social sectors, for the development in other social sectors. All right. So the writer has give this data that the revenues by taxes which are collected by the states, they account for only approximately 43% of the total revenues of the states and union territories combined. Rest of it, that means from where the rest of it is coming, the devolution from the center. Devolution from the center. So 15th Finance Commission made it 41%. 1% was reduced on account of J&K, the state of Jammu and Kashmir being relegated to the position of union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So 41% as per decided by the 15th Finance Commission. So the writer says that the state, they have a limited fiscal space. Now another question arises that can government monopolize in liquor and lottery? Now let's talk about this monopolization. Now what happens in monopolization? That means there will be no other player producing the same good. So if alcohol is monopolized by the state, then there will be no other player producing alcohol. So monopolization would what lead to what? Higher prices. Higher prices. There is a single distributor of a particular good, then that distributor is going to decide what the price will be. And higher prices, they take a huge toll on the life of the weaker section of the society. Weaker section of the society. Alcohol dependence is not only bad for the physical health, mental health, but also for the health of the society, because this psychological and the physiological dependence on alcohol does not get reduced by raising the prices. So that this brings us to another point that the writer raises, that taxes in order to reduce the consumption of the alcohol is going to have a limited impact, because the dependence will be too high and it is going to surpass even the level of the price that one would raise. All right. So it is the higher prices have a bad impact on the weaker section of the society who have developed this physiological dependence on alcohol. And also when it comes to the control and regulation of alcohol, we do see variation among the states. Some states have complete ban, other states have partial ban, for example Manipur. And there are certain states which regulates it, for example Maharashtra. And there are certain states where alcohol is distributed, manufactured and sold openly, for example Goa. So you can see the variation, and of course the variation will be seen because alcohol is a state subject. All right. So let's talk about the another question which is very important when it comes to the alcohol and lotteries. It is the interest groups. It is the interest groups. So writer has given example of the e-cigarettes. Now we know that India banned e-cigarette. There was a huge trend about e-cigarettes and vaping. This vaping means inhaling the vapor of the nicotine, which was according to the one section of the scientific community said that it is better than consuming tobacco and cigarette, which leads to cancer and other things. However, the nicotine vaping also led to other problems, and it also led to dependence. It also led to addiction. So India banned e-cigarettes, fine, but there were certain interest groups, for example the scientific community which did advocated for the e-cigarettes because it was less harmful. Then there is another, this is one such example where the interest group plays a huge role in deciding the policies made by the government. So let's take the example of the tobacco growers. Now what happens, the tobacco farmers, they always protest against the cigarette ban, right? So what does the government do? The government raises the taxes levied on the packet of a cigarette. All right, but we cannot have a ban on the tobacco farming, because there is a huge section of the people, especially around the area of the Guntur, which is very famous for the tobacco farming. And Indian tobacco is also famous across the globe because of its high variability and because of its peculiar nature of being to come in different flavors and different tastes and etc. And that means it can be made to vary in taste and flavor. So therefore there is a huge demand of Indian tobacco in the international market also. So considering these factors, the government hands are tied when it comes to complete banning of the tobacco. So similarly, when it comes to the alcohol, the state government, they have to consider all the stakeholders and all the interest groups who are interested in the alcohol manufacturing and who generate profit out of alcohol manufacturing. There are certain political leaders who have their own alcohol manufacturing factories, etc. There are big business houses who own their own casinos and own their own hotels and restaurants serving alcohols. So everything has to be considered, and all the stakeholders and the interest group have to be considered when it comes to deciding and designing the policies. Tobacco and e-cigarette was one such example to understand that how the interest groups they ply when it comes to regulating the alcohol. Sometimes these interest group does not allow the proper regulation of the alcohol also because of their vested interest. So this is one such example which the writer has given, that the tobacco industry provides employment to approximately 3.4 millions of Indians, and 3 million of whom were women. So basically the tobacco industry is employment generator, and if we want to switch the habit of people from consumption of tobacco to healthy diet and healthy and consumption of healthy products, then we have to generate alternative livelihood for those who are engaged in tobacco farming. We cannot abruptly move them from tobacco farming to some other employment. This has to be a gradual process, and therefore the writer says that taxation and this banning when it comes to alcohol and lotteries, it will not be very fruitful unless and until we gradually shift the population from depending on these two commodities to more healthy options. All right. So the writer talks about that what are the specific impacts of the government selling sin goods in the poor compared to other classes. Now, when we look at alcohol, so the writer says the alcohol consumption is rising among the middle classes. It is rising among the women also because of the higher aspiration, because of the different adoption of the lifestyle, because of urbanization, and because of the increased mobility, etc., etc. So the writer points towards the rising trend of alcohol consumption and rising trend of lotteries. Now lotteries they're shifting to online also. In previous edition of our editorial discussion, we did discuss about the online gaming, and online gaming on this online lottery is also one such issue. So the writer talks about that tax as an instrument, it has limitation. So cigarette example we did discuss. Similarly the alcohol, no matter how expensive the alcohol will be, if a person is dependent upon the alcohol and he or she cannot tolerate the withdrawal symptoms, then they will resort to alcohol again and again. There is a physiological dependence which is created, and it is hard to break. So therefore tax as an instrument will have a limitation. It also leads to bankruptcy, domestic violence, household disruption. However, the writer says there is still a silver lining, because according to the National Family Health Survey data, there has been seen among the proportion of the men. Writer is talking about that among the middle classes and among the women, the alcohol consumption is rising. And though the writer has not given the empirical data of his argument, but I am only talking about the argument of the writer. If the writer says that the alcohol consumption among middle classes and women is rising, then it should be supported by the empirical data. However, in this article, this empirical data was not given. The empirical data is only given for the proportion of the men who drink alcohol in India have decreased from the previous edition of the National Family Health Survey. So it used to be 29% in 2015-16, and now it is 22%. All right. However, this middle classes and women data is not given. So this has to be, let's say this is just an observation of the writer then. So the writer talks about this temperance movement which started in the 1880s. So what is this temperance movement? So what happened? The large section of the lower caste people, lower caste and tribes, they joined up this temperance movement against the alcohol, against the sale of alcohol, because of the negative impact that alcohol had on the society, the negative social impact that it has. This movement started, and it was directly against the role of the Britishers. Now, this is not such incident. Post independence also you must have studied about the Iraq movement in the Andhra Pradesh, the then undivided Andhra Pradesh. So this Iraq movement was against what? This was against the alcohol. The female of the village, they stopped working unless and until the male of the village stopped drinking. So this Iraq movement was quite a successful movement. Now, what is the real problem? The alcohol consumption is becoming more acceptable in the society. The writer says yes, that it is actually the writer has already spoken of the limitation of the taxes as a measure to curb this social menace. The writer also points towards that there is a demand, there is a rise in the demand in the alcohol consumption. The writer says that instead of strict regulation, instead of ban, instead of the strict regulation, instead of taxes, there should be a public education and programs to wean people away from the sin goods, sin goods. And considering the rising instances of crime against women when it comes to the online crimes such as stalking and etc., and other crimes such as rape, domestic violence, the marital rape which is still not recognized, and all these instances of crime against women and also children, the child sexual abuse and etc., somehow they're related with the alcohol consumption, related with the moral degradation in the society. So the writer basically talks about public education and programs which are needed to generate a sense of awareness, sense of moral responsibility among the citizenry, and to shift them towards a more healthy habit. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching Tarun IAS. Have a nice day.